Welcome to Sewing Anastasia, and today I'm going to show you how to add a slit to a skirt or a dress that doesn't have a seam. So this is going to allow you to add a slit anywhere on a garment. Now maybe you've tried this before, you're like, I want a slit right here, and you cut it open and then you try to finish the edges and turn it back, and at the top of the slit it gets real messy, you can't finish it, and it's real hard. What do you do? Well, I'm going to show you how to finish that slit professionally. And this method is really easy. You're going to be adding slits to everything. Real quick before we start, if you're enjoying the Sewing Anastasia channel, make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot. And if you want to learn more about sewing, make sure you check out my online sewing academy and my sewing club. Links are down below. I'm going to be demoing on this skirt here today. And again, I'm doing this where there is no seam. This is like a flat front on this skirt. So we're just going to be adding a slit. So the first thing we need to do is figure out, where do we want that slit? So you're gonna want to try on your skirt and figure out exactly where you want the slit. For this skirt here, I'm going to put it about here, and I'm going to put it 5 inches high. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm gonna put a mark here, and I'll just roughly draw a line while I have it on the dress form there, and we'll double check the straightness of it when we get it off the dress form. So I'm just gonna add a nice little slit to the front here. Now that we have the slit drawn, it is time to cut it open. This is the scary stuff. There's no going back once you cut it. So make sure you try on your skirt, make sure it's in the right spot. I'm gonna start at the hem, just make sure I have my one layer, and I'm gonna cut all the way to the top of where I want that slit. Well, now we've got a cut in our skirt. The real trick to finishing this easily and professionally is using bias tape, but we are not going to see any bias tape on the outside of our skirt. It's all going to be hidden on the inside. That's where the magic happens, so keep on watching. Today I'm going to be using single fold bias tape that's about 5/8 of an inch wide. Now you might end up cutting some of this down depending on how thick or thin your fabric is. And we need enough bias tape to go around the slit plus a few extra inches. So about that much bias tape will be plenty. The first thing we're gonna do is attach the bias tape to the outside of our skirt. So currently, you're gonna be seeing it on the outside. To do this, I'm going to be opening up the fold of my bias tape and lining it up with the raw edge of my slit. And now we're going to sew this all the way around the slit. And I've got some tips for when we get to the very tip of the slit over at the sewing machine. So I'm going to be sewing with the wrong side of my skirt face up, and the bias binding is underneath. And again, it's opened up flat, so the raw edge of the binding is with the raw edge of my skirt. I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And engage my needle down button so it's nice and easy to stop and adjust when I need to. Okay, we are getting up to the top of that slit, which is the important stuff. Okay, so we are going to sew a 1/4 inch up to it. Okay, now what we're going to do is cut a little slit into it. So I'm going to open up the tip of this. So I'm going to come in here and I'm cutting just the skirt, and I'm going to clip just to the needle, just like right before it, like a 1/16 of an inch before it. And it's going to allow me to open up this fabric on the skirt and keep on sewing. So we're going to essentially pull this straight. I'm gonna put down my foot, and you wanna make sure you keep any and all of the fabric out of the way. So you are keeping this nice and clear right in this area here, but we're still following a 1/4 of an inch. So you just catch the very edge, the very tip of that slit, which is enough. We're gonna come down to the bottom and backstitch. Let's take a look at what we just sewed up. So on the inside, it looks like this, because when we sewed it straight, we were coming straight down that binding, and we had clipped right here. It was real important that we didn't catch any pleats or folds in the fabric at this tip. And you can see when I release the fabric, everything's nice and smooth. There's no tucks or pleats up here at the top. And that worked well for us because we clipped into the little edge where we were sewing. The next step is going to be flipping the binding to the inside. Now, before we iron it all under, since I have a really thin fabric, I don't want a giant piece of facing in here. So I'm going to cut away some of the bias tape. I'm going to cut it down by about 1/4 of an inch. So basically right where this crease is, I'm going to go ahead and cut off that bias tape. So this is the point in your project to check and see how wide is your bias tape and do you need to cut it down. You've got a really thick, chunky wool or tweed, it might be great. But if you have a really thin fabric, a satin or really thin wool, you're probably gonna wanna cut it down. So I've cut off a little bit of my binding. And now what we're going to do is go over to the iron. Next, we're gonna do a little ironing, and you can see when I fold this over twice that it's going to be less bulky and it's gonna give us a nice narrow piece of bias tape. So our first step for ironing is going to be to iron our seam allowance towards the binding, and then we want a nice crisp edge where the binding and the self meet. So I'm going to be ironing the self towards the binding. So our seam is getting ironed towards the binding. And now what I'm gonna do to get a nice crisp edge is fold this edge back, give it another press. Okay. And now we're gonna come back and fold the binding over to the seam. And now we're gonna fold the whole thing back again and give it one more press. So you can see we're putting a crease back in the binding. So essentially the whole little piece of binding is gonna be flipped to the inside, and then you can go ahead and pin it down. Now, when we get up to the point up here, it's gonna be a little tricky. So we're gonna clip into the binding there, just the one layer in the seam allowance to release just a little extra tension up there. And we're just gonna keep doing this all the way around. So let me put a few more pins in there until we get there. I'm gonna do the other side as well. So I have both sides here pinned up to the tip of the slit here. And to make this real easy, what I want you to do is just pull it straight. And now what we're going to do is work this binding over. This is a little tricky up in this area. Try and make sure everything stays nice and flat and straight. And put some pins in here. So it should be nice and smooth. And now what we're gonna do is go over to the sewing machine and we are gonna add some stitches to this to keep this all down to the inside. We're gonna have to be careful around the point up here that you don't stitch any pleats in it. And we also have to make sure at the bottom here that we are folding in our binding so that way we get a nice clean edge here at the hem. So you wanna make sure you're folding that in like that so that way you have a nice clean hem. I'll go over that again at the machine as well. So I'm gonna start at the hem, and again, so fold that bias binding, open it up, fold it up, make it flush with the bottom of the skirt, and then put your folds back into it. And now we are ready to start sewing. So I have everything folded in. I'm going to be adding that edge stitch to the left side of the binding here. Okay, when we get up to the point up here, the top of the slit, just keep everything nice and flat. And make sure it doesn't want to turn out to the right. You got to make sure you keep it all turned in here to the left. Before you get all the way to the bottom, make sure you've got that bottom edge of the binding folded up. So fold it up and then fold it over and over again. So one fold, and then we've got one more fold in there, over to the left. So now you can continue sewing all the way down your slit. Just want to mention that I pulled my slit out to just show you guys that again, but you should leave it in the machine or have pre-folded it before. When we get to the bottom, add a few back stitches, And we're done. Now that we're all done, let's check it out. So on the outside, we have a nice finished edge, and you can see that we have a bit of an opening. That's because we just cut a slit into it. We had seam allowance here on both sides, so it is supposed to look like that. And now let's turn it to the wrong side. And you can see on the inside that we have it finished with the bias tape here, creating a nice U-shape bias facing. So this is a great way to add a slit to a garment and have it nice and strong and durable. It is not gonna fall apart or start fraying on you. It is ready for the dance floor or maybe that next meeting you have. And that wasn't too hard at all, was it? And the trickiest part is really just working that little V-U shape at the very top, but really ironing it helps, and folding it and manipulating that fabric there and putting those little clips into it to release the tension. And if you're still getting a lot of puckers up there, remember, snip into the seam, not through the seam, and it should open up and release a lot of the tension up there. Thanks so much for watching Sewing Anastasia today. If you have any questions on the process, leave it down below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And I'd love to know what kind of garment alterations or pattern videos would you like to see coming up soon. Leave that down below in the comments as well. And don't forget, if you like Sewing Anastasia, make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot. And if you're in Chicago, come on into the design studio and take some classes with me. Or if you're anywhere else in the world, check out the online sewing classes and the sewing club. There's links for all of those down below. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.